Naira Selen arrived in orbit of Venari Station on the back of Silence and Starfire. Her vessel, sleek, seamless, and veiled in reflective light, slipped into the diplomatic port without announcement. No fanfare. No ceremony. Her presence, like everything about her, was deliberate. Subtle. A whisper rather than a shout. The platform officers bowed low as she descended, her gown of woven null fabric catching no light, its curves flowing like shadow-given form. She wore her veil, as always, a silken shimmer of opalescent nanothread that cloaked her features just enough to suggest the divine. To inspire curiosity. To command control. For 10 standard years, she had been the Selen envoy, architect of truces, dissolver of feuds, the final word in any conversation where beauty could make politics a softer battlefield. And she had never failed. Not once. Until today, she had no reason to believe she ever would. The negotiation chamber in Venari Station's neutral core was designed to impress through restraint. Stark lines. Polished stone. Nothing to distract from the words spoken within its gravity-free ring. Delegates from the Siren and More Than alliances sat in silence on either side of the suspended platform, tension running through them like a current. The blood they had shed between them spanned a dozen worlds. Naira was meant to stop that. She always did. But she wasn't alone this time. Her counterpart, the third-party representative from the Orbiters, a faction neither Siren nor More Than, stood across from her. She had expected someone tired. Bitter. Maybe even desperate. What she got instead was Kauran Vis. He was, plain. Unadorned. Tall, perhaps, but not striking. His hair was dark and too long for military standards, brushing his collar in waves. His uniform was simple. No medals. No insignias. Even his posture, upright but unpretentious, was disarming. He looked at her only once. And never at her veil. "You're late," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, clear, and shaped to settle into memory. "I waited until the room was quiet," he replied. That startled her more than it should have. His voice was unshakably calm, more like a teacher than a soldier. It was not a tone people used with her. "I trust your journey was smooth," she said, switching to formality. "Long," he replied. "But yes. Smooth." He stood with his hands folded at his back, eyes steady on the central light well of the platform, not on her. Everyone always looked at her. They drank her in like thirsting men. "Naira Selen," she offered, with the smallest of bows. "Envoy of the aligned sectors. I'll be mediating this process." "Kauran Vis," he replied. "Representative of the Orbiters. I'll be telling the part of the story you're all trying to forget." Again, that calm. No venom. Just fact. Naira blinked slowly behind her veil. "And what story is that?" she asked. "The one where your peace has a price. And people like us are the ones who pay it." Their first session lasted 6 hours. The Siren delegates bristled. The More Than envoy stormed out twice. And still, Kauran never raised his voice. His words cut deep because he didn't try to make them sharp. He only made them true. Naira watched him closely. She tried her tricks. The slight lean in when he spoke. The gentle touch to her collarbone. The breathless pause between words. Every gesture designed to distract, to control, to allure. He didn't even blink. He listened. He answered. He offered data and anecdote in equal measure. And when she pressed too hard, he didn't argue. He waited. Silence, she realized, was his weapon. Later, in her private chamber, walls smooth as pearl, floors lit with veins of reactive crystal, Naira stood before her reflection. She touched the edge of her veil with trembling fingers. Who was this man? And why had he unsettled her so deeply? For the first time in her diplomatic life, someone had spoken with her, not around her. Not beneath her. Not above her. With. She hadn't felt that, ever. On the second day, Kauran arrived early. He brought a single data pad. No aides. No guards. Just a cup of something steaming and bitter-smelling. "You're not required to show up until the start of session," she said when she found him waiting. "I know," he replied. "But the silence here is nice." "You like silence, don't you?" He sipped. Nodded. "Silence is honest." She took a step closer, the crystals in her gown shifting hue slightly. "Lavender to midnight. And you think I'm not?" He finally looked at her. Really looked. And still, it wasn't desire she saw. It was curiosity. "I think you wear a mask that works too well," he said. "So well, I don't think you remember what's underneath anymore." Naira felt her heart skip. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not in 10 years. Not in all her training. "You presume much, Kauran Viscount." "I observe," he said, finishing his drink. "You seduce entire rooms. You breathe, and others lean in. But not once have I seen you smile just for yourself." She spent that night sleepless. Stripping herself of costume layer by layer, standing barefoot in a chamber too large and too full of things that glittered but meant nothing. Her hand hovered over her veil. Not tonight. Not yet. But soon. The third day brought progress. Siren agreed to open corridors for refugee traffic. More than promised reparations. The orbiters would be granted a trial vote in planetary economic decisions. Kauran's quiet persistence was working. And Naira was learning. Not about politics. About herself. When he spoke, she didn't interrupt. When he challenged her assumptions, she considered. When she laughed, genuinely, freely, just once, he smiled. And it wasn't the kind of smile she'd earned before. It was real. Simple. Warm. She thought about that smile long after the session ended. "You still wear the veil," he said on the fourth day, as they stood alone in the observation atrium. Stars bloomed like frost above them, refracted endlessly in the mirrored shell of the station. Naira hesitated. Then, quietly, "It keeps people from seeing too much. Or anything at all. Maybe." He turned to her. "I see you." The words struck her like gravity. She took a breath, reached up, fingers shaking, and removed the veil. The silence stretched long. His eyes didn't widen. He didn't gasp. He only nodded. "Thank you." And for the first time in her life, Naira Selen didn't feel like a performance. She felt seen. Their hands brushed later, by accident. Or maybe not. She didn't pull away. On the fifth day, after the accords were signed, Kauran found her again in the atrium. The veil was gone. Her gown was simpler. No reactive thread, no strategic shimmer. Just her. "Naira. We did it," she said. "You did it," he replied. She shook her head. "No, we did." He smiled again, and God's help her, it made her chest ache. "What happens now?" he asked. She took his hand. Intertwined their fingers. And answered the only way she could. "We find out who I am without the veil." Beneath the mirrored stars, Naira Selen stepped away from the role she had always played, and toward the truth she never thought she'd be brave enough to live. The city of Arinth never touched ground. It floated endlessly above the lavender storm belts of Selos 5, tethered to nothing, its foundations woven from antigrav filaments and dream steel. Each of its walkways rang with soft harmonic tones, tuned to the frequencies of wind and weight. For Anand Vrail, sound was everything. He was born blind. His eyes, though silvered and whole, had never seen a single sunlit moment. But that never stopped him. He painted in light echoes. Sculpted with sonar. Created art that pulsed with the emotional memory of space. And in Arinth, he was revered for it. But reverence was a quiet kind of loneliness. People came to admire his work. They spoke of his talent in hushed awe. But they rarely stayed. Rarely asked him who he was when the music stopped. And so, Annan learned to live in rhythm with solitude. Until the day her voice found him. She arrived at his gallery on a Tuesday. The wind outside sang with rising pressure. Annan was tuning a sound sculpture, a crescent of metal that whispered arpeggios when touched. He didn't hear her approach. Not until she spoke. What is it supposed to say? He froze. Not because of the question, but because of her voice. He'd heard a million tones. But hers. It vibrated differently. Low and warm. Like the memory of fire. Like a secret meant for one person only. It's not saying, he replied carefully. It's listening. A pause. Then, that's sad. He turned slowly, tracking the sound of her footsteps, the rustle of her coat. Why? Because it's waiting to hear something it might never receive. He felt his lips twitch. Or maybe it's listening for someone who finally speaks in its language. Silence. Not awkward. Thoughtful. She stepped closer. He could hear the soft scuff of her boots on the gallery's stone floor, the breath she held too long before letting it go. What's your name? She asked. Annan Vrail. I'm Lyra. He repeated it in his mind. Not the word, the sound. She pronounced it like a thread being pulled taut. Are you here for the exhibition? He asked. No, she said. I'm just wandering. He smiled. Then you're the first honest visitor I've had in weeks. Lyra came back the next day. And the day after that. Sometimes she brought music. Strange, alien melodies from outer systems. Sometimes she brought questions. Never about his blindness. Only about his thoughts. About the sculptures. About what it felt like to live in a world built of sound. Once, she asked, do you ever wish you could see it? He thought long before answering. I think, if I could see it, I'd stop hearing it the way I do. And that would be a kind of loss. She was quiet after that. Until she whispered, you might be the only person I've ever met who doesn't envy someone else's senses. They shared silence like others shared wine. He learned the rhythm of her breathing. The slight tremble in her hands when she touched something fragile. The way she laughed only when no one else was around. She learned how he moved through rooms with the precision of memory. How he ran his fingers across a sculpture's edge like it was alive. How he never interrupted, only waited. Their connection grew in the spaces between words. Weeks passed. And one night, after a rainstorm that left the city bells slick with melody, she stayed longer than usual. I need to tell you something, she said, standing at the edge of his studio. Then tell me, he said, motioning her in. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered, can I just sit with you? He nodded. They sat for an hour. No talking. Just the quiet hum of suspended platforms outside. And when she finally stood to leave, she kissed his cheek. He didn't reach for her. He didn't need to. He already knew she was crying. He didn't see her again for 3 days. When she returned, her voice was different. Guarded. I wasn't honest, she said. About what? He asked. I'm not just a wanderer. I'm from the Drazari Reach. A terraforming scientist. I came here because I was told to scout Arinth. See if it could be converted. His heart stilled. Converted. Destroyed. Made into something else. So you lied, he asked, evenly. At first, she said. But then, I found you. And I didn't want to lie anymore. But I didn't know how to stop. He didn't speak. He stood, walked slowly to the wind chime window that looked out into the storm belts. He could feel them pulsing. Angry. Alive. Why tell me now? Because if I didn't, it would mean I never truly heard you. She crossed the room, reached for his hand. I'll resign, she said. I've already sent my request. They won't use me to take this place. Not after what I've learned here. He turned to her. Touched her cheek. I can hear your heartbeat, he said softly. Is that good? It's not afraid anymore. After that, she stayed. Not for an exhibition. Not for a report. For him. She watched as he created a new sculpture, his most ambitious. Not tuned to the wind or light. But to her voice. When it was done, she spoke her name into it. It responded with a harmony she had never heard. Not once in her life. What is it saying now? She whispered. Anand smiled. Meleardine believed in systems. Not politics. Not people. Not unpredictable variables. But systems. Closed loops. Dependable algorithms. Gravity generators that pulsed on rhythm. Circuits that obeyed commands. Anything she could calculate, she could trust. People. Not so much. She worked in the core stabilizer ring of Station Pyros 8, a ring world station wrapped in orbit around a burnt-out white dwarf. It wasn't pretty. But it was quiet. Isolated. Dependable. Until the ship slammed into Deck 47. It wasn't even a graceful collision. It buckled airlocks, melted 3 junction panels, and kicked off enough emergency warnings to flood her entire sector in blinking red. The kind of chaos Meleir hated. She threw on her suit, clipped her tool harness, and stomped to the crash zone, muttering every step. The wrecked vessel was small, a freighter class, painted with faded trade guild markings and unregistered beacon pings. Rogue, probably. Smugglers, definitely. One life sign inside. Of course. She cut through the jammed hatch manually. Heat-slick metal. Trailing sparks. Hold on in there, she muttered. If you're alive, you better not bleed on my conduit boards. A cough echoed from inside. Then a voice. Hoarse. Too casual. You always greet guests with threats, or am I just special? Meleir blinked. The voice didn't match the wreckage. Smooth. Teasing. Like someone who didn't deserve to sound that calm. You're an idiot, she snapped, climbing into the wreckage. He was pinned under a console, half his face bruised, but his smile was somehow intact. Name's Kale Soren, he said. And you are? Annoyed. Nice to meet you, annoyed. She rolled her eyes. Hard. It took her an hour to free him. Another hour to stabilize the core. And a full day to realize Kale had no intention of leaving. You should be in med bay, she told him 3 times. Resting. Not wandering my maintenance decks. I'm fine, he lied. Plus, I like the view. The view is a fusion coil array. Exactly. Very, radiant. That's leaking plasma. Dangerous. Intriguing. Like you. She fixed him with a glare that could melt titanium. He winked. He stayed on station for repairs. Official story. Unofficially, he kept showing up. In her maintenance crawlspaces. On her break shift. Once in her private toolshed, trying to help reorganize. She caught him. Again. You need a hobby, she said, snatching her plasma driver back. I've got one, he said. It's called annoying Meleir Dine. How long are you planning to stick around? He shrugged. Until you throw me out. That can be arranged. He smiled. And for the first time, she didn't hate it. The station's artificial gravity failed on week 2. Of course, Cale was in the wrong place at the wrong time, literally hanging upside down in a transit shaft. She dragged him to safety through a tilted corridor while he hummed songs about space pirates and swore creatively every time he bumped his head. When they finally tumbled into a low-grav compartment, breathless and floating, he said something that made her pause. "I don't get you." Melier blinked. "Good. No, seriously. You saved me, 3 times now. You risk your neck for this place. But you talk like none of it matters." She pushed off from the wall, rotating slowly in the half-light. "Because if I care too much," she said, "I'll start needing things I can't fix with a wrench." Cale fell quiet. The only sound was their heartbeats, faint and unsensed in the pressure-controlled silence. "You're not a system," she said finally. "No," he agreed. "But maybe I could be a part of yours." The next day, the station lost its thermal regulator array. Which meant, power drops. Sub-zero air pockets. Flickering lights. Cale didn't leave. He stayed. Rewired modules. Fetched tools. Followed her through smoke-choked halls without complaint. Once, she caught him staring, not at her, but at her hands. Her hands, slick with coolant, shaking from exhaustion. "What?" she asked. He shook his head. "I've just never seen someone hold the world together with their bare hands before." She laughed once. Bitter. "This place isn't the world. It's yours." She couldn't answer that. The kiss happened after they rerouted emergency power manually through 3 sectors. The lights came back on. Alarms fell silent. Systems hummed. He touched her face, so gently she almost pulled back. But she didn't. And when their lips met, it wasn't desperate. It was patient. Like gravity. Quiet. Inevitable. Afterward, they sat in the reactor chamber's warm hum, her head resting on his chest. "You're leaving after this," she said softly. He didn't deny it. "I've got debts," he said. "People waiting." "So go," she said. "Do you want me to?" A long silence. She wanted to say no, beg him to stay. Rewrite the future in real time. But she was Melier Dine. And Melier Dine didn't beg. "I want you to come back," she said instead. He nodded. "Then I will." He left 2 days later, ship barely holding together, one last grin tossed over his shoulder. No promises. Just potential. But he left a note in her toolshed. "For the woman who rewired my heart like a circuit board. Keep the gravity on until I get back." Melier smiled. For the first time in years, her systems weren't perfect. But they were hers. And maybe, just maybe, they had room for someone else. Jalen Oris lived among ghosts. Not the kind that haunted ships or whispered through cold air vents, but the quieter ones, the kind that lingered in old data, forgotten languages, and decaying digital storage. As a senior archivist on Station Memoria, orbiting the ruined core of Uran 6, he spent his days cataloging the memories of dead civilizations. He preferred it that way. People were unpredictable. Records, he could understand. Memories didn't lie. Most days, Jalen worked in silence. Endless corridors of sealed records, ambient temperature set low to preserve fragile materials. The only sound was his own breath and the soft hum of data scanners. It was enough. Until one morning, a delivery capsule blinked into his intake chamber, marked, undocumented, salvaged from Site Deltavora. Encrypted. Organic storage. Caution advised. Organic storage. Handwritten. Rare. Dangerous. Delicate. He slid the seal open and stared. Inside, paper. Real, faded paper. 117 pages. Ink hand-scripted in a language he didn't recognize. A dialect. Possibly lost. At the top of each page, the same signature. For Kane, always. He filed the letters under Category 7, Potential Cultural Significance. But something about them wouldn't let him walk away. The paper smelled like lavender and oil. The strokes were fluid, personal. Emotional. This was a love story. And Jalen, to his own surprise, wanted to understand it. He submitted a request for assistance in linguistic decoding. Normally, such requests went to external researchers and took weeks. But the next morning, someone was waiting at his desk. "I hear you have a mystery," she said. She was younger than him. Wild curls. Eyes that moved like they were always chasing light. "And you are?" he asked. "Lynn Tane," she said, sliding a scanner case onto the table. "Xenolinguist. I specialize in dead dialects. You've got a good one here." He blinked. "You read my request already?" She grinned. "No, but your system's open. You didn't encrypt the data header." His ears burned. "I didn't think anyone would." "It's fine," she said, waving him off. Most archivists don't know how to hide curiosity. They started slow. Translating page by page. She would read the script aloud in soft syllables, translating sentence by sentence. He would catalog, record, annotate. The letters were breathtaking. They were from one lover to another, written across years. Planets apart. Longing wrapped in metaphor and memory. "I held the sunset for you today. Not the real one, the memory of it, painted in my mind. It reminded me of your breath, when you're sleeping. Slow and full of stars." Lynn read that one aloud one afternoon, then looked at Jalen. He was staring at the page too hard. "You okay?" He didn't answer for a moment. "Why does it feel like they're still waiting?" he asked quietly. She smiled sadly. "Because they are." Over the weeks, the letters became more intense. "Please to return." Whispers of war. Fragments of hope. And then, nothing. Page 117 ended mid-sentence. No signature. No farewell. Lynn sat in silence beside him, staring at the last line. "And if you do not come back, promise me this." They never knew what the promise was. The quiet that followed the final translation felt heavy. Jalen found himself, unsettled. He hadn't realized how much he'd relied on those letters. How much of himself he had poured into them. How much he had seen himself in the writer. "They were afraid," he said one night, staring out at the slow swirl of space debris beyond the archive window. Lynn leaned against the ledge beside him. "You think so?" He nodded. "Afraid they'd never be loved again. Afraid they gave too much and lost everything." "Sounds familiar," she said. He looked at her. She didn't look away. That night, they stayed in the archives late, running simulation cross-scans on the seal of the delivery capsule. A breakthrough. Location code traceable. Origin, deep ruins of Uran 6, beneath collapsed atmosphere domes. Lynn whistled. "You want to go?" "Field work," Jalen said. "I don't have to go alone," she said. He blinked. They descended together. The ruins were half-eaten by moss and rust. Old foundations, sunken towers, petrified soil. They walked in silence, both wearing thin bubble suits with rebreathers. Then, in a corner of a collapsed shelter, they found the rest of it. A second box. Inside, one page. Aged, ink-smudged. But readable. Jalen held his breath as Lynn translated it aloud. "And if you do not come back, Promise me this, don't stop loving. Don't let what we have become a closed system. Let it pass on. Let it grow in someone else. In yourself. She stopped reading. He stood, quietly stunned. Lin turned to him. What are you thinking? That I've been a closed system, he said. For years. She smiled gently. And now? He turned toward her, taking a slow breath. Now I think, maybe I'm ready to grow again. They kissed there, beneath the broken stars of a dead world. Soft. Cautious. But full of potential. The letters went into a special exhibit. Labeled not as historical data, but as preserved emotional legacy. Jalen stood beside Lin on opening day. She nudged him gently. Do you believe it now? Believe what? That memories aren't ghosts. They're seeds. He looked at her. And at the hand she held so easily in his. I believe, he said, that the stars remember everything. And sometimes, they give us a second chance to do the same.